Hello, Bookworms of Concord. I'm Hallowed Autistic. So, because I've started pretty late in creating content for the book talk world, I'm going to start giving book recommendations of my most favorite books, beginning with Babel by R.F. Kuang. I read this late last year and actually made a video of my top 10 books that I read in 2024, and Babel is actually number one. So the full title is actually Babel, or the Necessity of Violence, an Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. A mouthful, so Bible suffices. This book is a very compelling blend of grimdark historical fantasy and dark academia that delves into themes of language, power, and colonialism. It's set in an alternate 1830s England, and the narrative follows Robin Swift, who's an orphan from Canton, China, and he's brought to London by a mysterious benefactor named Professor Lovell. And Robin undergoes rigorous training in languages to secure a place at Oxford University's prestigious Royal Institute of Translation, which is known as Babel. And here, the work of translation is not merely academic, but a magical practice called silverworking, which harnesses the nuances lost in translation to fuel the British Empire's dominance. And so Kuang's meticulous world building vividly portrays the era's socio-political landscape and highlights the exploitation inherent in colonialism. And I haven't read as much fantasy novels yet as most content creators on here have, but the novel's magic system, I believe, is the most unique among fantasy authors because it's rooted in linguistic intricacies, which offers a unique perspective on the transformative power of language. I haven't read anything remotely like that. And the protagonist, Robin, becomes entangled with a clandestine rebel group called the Hermes Society, who are dedicated to resisting imperial expansion. And Robin grapples with his identity and the moral complexities of his role within Babel. And the character development is quite robust, with each character embodying diverse backgrounds and ideologies, which enriches the narrative's depth significantly. And Kuang's prose, though, is rather esoteric. It's not for everybody, especially if the idea of linguistics bores you, but she seamlessly integrates academic discourse with engaging storytelling. Overall, Babel is a thought-provoking exploration of the intersections between language, power, and resistance, and I highly recommend it if you're into grimdark and historical fantasy, or if you love linguistics, or if you have an interest in the dynamics of colonialism and academia. To get into some personal insights, I found myself relating to the protagonist Robin a lot. Like him, if I could spend my whole life in a library reading books and writing about them and languages. Now, as a pastor, I had to study Greek and Hebrew and some Latin, and I excelled at the languages. I loved it. If I could do that, I'd be so happy. And also, like him, I struggled with the love-hate relationship he has with academia. And as Christians, the book brings up considerations worth discussing, which I remember having during my own academic studies at the seminary. The question revolves around early Christian missionaries and the veneer of colonialism in their efforts, which was, evangelize the natives, not just with the truths of Christianity, but also and especially with English or American culture and mores. Natives were left with two options: assimilate into white society or evangelize your villages with English or American culture. And it's a conversation worth having as Christians in recognizing historical errors in evangelism, and how we can properly spread the gospel without demanding total assimilation to our preferred culture. And this is why I highly admire the work of Lutheran Bible translators, which instead of colonizing cultures that don't have the Bible in their own languages with American or German Lutheranism, they simply teach the natives the biblical languages and leave it to the native leaders to decide on translational choices and which of their customs should either be transformed by the gospel, like El Dia de los Muertos aggregated with All Saints Day, or abandoned because of the spiritual dangers they pose, such as ancestor worship, while developing harmless means to honor them, much like we Lutherans still venerate the saints without praying to them. But among other important issues, another problem the book addresses is obviously colonialism's efforts to erase a language in favor of a different one. And in the 1830s England of Babel, it's English, which, despite the fact that it's fiction, is rather illustrative of real history. We've also seen it during the Swedish rule of Finland from 1150 to 1809, the history of which is close to my heart, since my wife is a native of Finland. During this time, it was illegal for Finns to speak Finnish and were required by law to speak Swedish. And it was also illegal to give their children Finnish names. And the Finns quite literally almost lost their language, which is why the Kalevala, which is the collection of Finnish folklore and mythology, has become critically important in maintaining their language and culture, and also why Finns tend to give their children strictly Finnish names. If this doesn't seem problematic to you, take a moment to imagine an alien invader subverting your entire people to their culture and making it illegal to speak English, in our case, under threat of death. Besides that, Kuang, she not only critiques colonialism, she also challenges the reader with linguistic repression or suppression, which is when a country makes it illegal to teach others its native language. The example in the novel is the Chinese Qing government that made it illegal to teach foreigners Mandarin, which is also true to history. Does a country have the right to do this as protection against colonialism and therefore against the theft of resources and oppression of their people? Why shouldn't languages be shared? Perhaps it's best to share languages and therefore culture and resources humanely, since linguistic suppression also tends toward brutal methods such as the Qing government, because teaching foreigners Mandarin was punishable by death under that dynasty. Furthermore, Kuang challenges the reader with the ethics of opposing the evils of colonialism. Can it be done peacefully, or is violence truly the only way? In the words of French Afro-Caribbean political philosopher Frantz Fanon, he says, "Colonialism is not a machine capable of thinking, a body endowed with reason. It is naked violence and only gives in when confronted with greater violence." Something to ponder. So I'll leave that to you to decide. But a final thing I'll say is if I were to have any critiques, Kuang utilizes Josephus's erroneous interpretation of the Tower of Babel, that it was their attempt to get closer to God rather than what the text actually says, which was their desire to make a name for themselves and disobey God's command to multiply across the earth. That's in Genesis 11, verse 4 specifically. But I don't consider this a true critique of the novel, since Josephus's error is commonly accepted among scholars. And so it's only accurate that the misinterpretation is employed at the Oxford in this book. Besides, it doesn't have any bearing on the novel's narrative. So, yeah, again, great book, and it's just fascinating, esoteric, but so much fun to read. Hope you enjoy the review, and I hope you pick up this book. If you've read it, let me know your thoughts. Okay, bye.